It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
Welcome to the show, everybody. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. Just got back from Kentucky and went and protested the Ark with the Tri-State Freethinkers. So if you're anywhere around that part of the country, southern Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, Kentucky, Ohio, Cincinnati area, Tri-State Freethinkers, a very nice local organization that does a lot of things and helps fight church-state violations, including the existence of the Ark itself. And of course, they got something like 80 acres from the government for $1, so they didn't have to pay for the land. They get all these tax breaks, tax incentives, and apparently their employees have to pay 2% of their wages to help offset the cost of the Ark Park itself running. I'm not quite sure how that works. They have a whole bunch of bonds that were issued by the government, the Ark did, to raise money to build it. And the funny thing is that the bonds are being paid back by the Ark not paying property tax on a majority of the property taxes they should be paying for the land that they developed. And of course, they continuously try to get area schools or even statewide schools to come visit the Ark, not only because it brings in money, but because they get to indoctrinate children. So a lot of reasons to protest this thing and a lot of reasons to not like this thing. And of course, a lot of Christians don't like this thing because city and local government coughed up a lot of money with promises of millions and millions of people coming. This was going to be the Disney World or Disneyland of the middle of America. And it's not. It's got this incredibly large parking lot with very, very few cars in it. But apparently it's enough still to stay open and make Ken Ham and his relatives nice fat wages for running this thing, even if it doesn't break even or make money. They're all getting wealthy over time. So yay for them for figuring out how to cheat the system. But I'm very upset with that. So later on in the show, I'm going to have 3 different interviews from the event. And you'll please have to forgive me. I am not an expert with field interviewing techniques. And maybe I don't have the best equipment or I don't know how to use it as well. But there's some wind sounds. There are traffic noises. But maybe you like it because you pick up the energy and the excitement of it. I have one with a gentleman named Robert who used to be a fundamentalist Christian. And he tells us a little bit about his story. I talked to, I believe it's a husband and wife team. Although I didn't ask, so it could be they're related to each other or some other way. Joshua and Jessica talking about why they're there to protest. And then, of course, finally, I have a third interview from Eric Murphy, who works with the ACA, Atheist Community of Austin, and has his own podcast and YouTube stuff. And we'll hear about that during his interview. But before we get to that, of course, I'll have 3 short investing skeptically segments. I had planned 1, but because the interviews that I got are all kind of short, I'm going to do 3 investing skeptically segments, in part because I have them and they're driving me nuts. The one that I had planned was on buffered funds, or is on buffered funds, so you'll enjoy that. But then I also have another one about Vanguard where they did something I didn't like, so check that out. And of course, one that really kind of came up suddenly and had several people ask about it, so I kind of had to discuss it. And that one is on what's called yield inversion. What happens when short-term interest rates are higher than long-term interest rates? And it's one of those things that a lot of articles, newspapers, journals, websites are using to help whip up a little bit of fear about a pending recession. So if you've heard or seen, or maybe in the future you'll hear or see the yield inversion, and alarms are going off, yield inversion predicts recession. We're going to talk about that and some of the mathematics and probabilities of how predictable, how reliable. Is there a correlation? We're going to talk about all that. So look forward to that. Before I get into all of that fun stuff, 3 interviews and 3 different segments, I do want to do a quick summary review of my drive to Cincinnati, because it was the first and longest drive I've had so far in my Chevy Bolt EV. And that's Bolt starting with a B for Bravo, Chevy Bolt EV, all electric car, no gasoline allowed. It is a different kind of thing. It's not like driving a normal car. And on the way down there, I had to stop twice to put in electricity. I stopped a third time just to make sure I had more when I arrived, because I wanted to do some driving around. So the entire trip, I had to wait and sit for about 50 minutes to charge up the car. So what was a 5-hour drive became almost a 6-hour drive. Now, it wasn't bad, because for me anyway, I'm not going to drive 5 or 6 hours, 300 miles in one shot anyway. I will definitely stop once to put in some gas, which might be 10 minutes, 5 minutes. I'll stop once or twice to go to the bathroom. I might have stopped to get some food. And sometimes I just like to stop to get out and walk a little bit, because, I just don't like sitting in a car that long. If you're different and you were just going to go straight 5+ hours, then truly this would add 50 minutes to your trip. The first stop was only 11, 12 minutes, just to make sure I have enough to get to the next location. I went from my house near Joliet to Lafayette, Indiana, charged for 11 minutes. And then when I got south of Indianapolis, I charged for 22 minutes. And the charging station was in a parking lot of a Walmart, so I got to go in and buy a snack, buy a bottle of water, do a couple of laps inside the store, got some exercise. I come back out to the car, I unplug it, I hop in, and I go. The third stop was in a little town called Aurora, Indiana, just across the border from the river on the Kentucky side. Well, I guess the city's in the Indiana side. And I stopped there just because that's the only fast charging station anywhere in that area. And I wanted to add a little more fuel. And there was only one charger there, and someone was already using it. And this is still one of the problems with the network, is that there's not a whole lot of charging stations. They can be far apart. And if something doesn't work out well, you could spend a couple of hours using a much slower charger to get to your destination. So there's that fear, that concern, that risk, because the network is not built out well enough. And I will grant again, Tesla's network is much more robust. They have a big head start, and good for them. I am delighted that they are helping this push towards electric cars. The nice thing is that my hotel that I then went and checked into had 4 charging stations in it. So I could plug in my car. I went and checked into my hotel, hung out for a while. And of course, overnight, it charged for free. So instead of paying for gas or instead of paying for electricity, all of that was for free. Stayed there the whole weekend, drove back and forth, drove down to the Ark and back, visited my good friend Jim Helton and his wife, Christy. And of course, they had a nice plug in their garage that they let me use, because Jim has a Tesla. So I was able to charge them there, and they were kind enough to let me do that at no cost. So when you have these long drives, there is this extra time of charging. But when you drive locally or short drives, every day I wake up with a car full of energy. So you've got to remember all the times I don't go to a gas station. So I think on the whole, it works out pretty well. It's just that little bit of anxiety that's still there, that if you drive a couple of hours to get to a charging station and so for some reason it doesn't work, now what do you do? So you have to have a backup plan. On the way back, the location of the chargers worked out a little bit better for me. Did stop only twice and only for 40 minutes total. So again, I probably would have stopped for food once. I would have stopped to go to the bathroom once, maybe to get gas once. maybe I would have spent 15, 20 minutes total stopped. So it only added about 20 minutes to my drive. And I kind of like the little breakup, at least for this long of a trip. If you're going to go on an 8-hour drive or a 10-hour drive, it could start to become much more annoying. So that's a little bit about electric cars, and they're getting better. And of course, as the battery packs get bigger and your range gets longer and your charge times get smaller, it's just going to be better and better and better. And of course, in the long run, an electric car is much more affordable, wildly more affordable to drive than a gasoline-powered car. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we are going to do three investing skeptically segments. And then after that, I have 3 quick interviews about the park, and then I'll come back and wrap it all up on the other side. This investing skeptically segment is about buffered funds. It's something I've talked about a couple of times in the last few months, but it's a big trendy thing. It's a buzzword, buffered funds. And I've talked about it, but this came to me as an email from a company that I'm not going to name because I don't want anyone to think I'm endorsing this. Matter of fact, most companies or products that I talk about, I'm going to be snarky and satirical and disclose the trickery or tell you to avoid it. So most everything is not an endorsement by default, but because I'm going to play a little bit of their video, or at least the audio from the video, and the video didn't help much, it just had some graphics, but I'm going to play this for you so you can hear it. And there's going to be a spot pretty early on where it just goes absolutely silent for a second or so. And that's because I just blotted out the name. I thought about beeping it over, but I don't know how one does that really easily. So I just blotted it out. So there's this weird silence. And so you're going to hear that. And I think this is a little bit shy of 2 minutes. So I want you to listen to this piece. Then I'll come back on the other side and talk about it a little bit.
Typically, bonds are expected to counterbalance stocks. This works until both fall together. And moving to cash means missing opportunities and losing to inflation. The S&P 500 Buffer Strategy Fund addresses these challenges, seeking to deliver a targeted level of downside protection while allowing participation in upside growth. The fund utilizes the options-based Buffer Protect strategy, which seeks to protect the first 10% of annual losses in the S&P 500. In return for this protection, there is a cap on investment gains. For example, if the S&P 500 drops 15%, the Buffer Protect strategy seeks to hedge the first 10% of losses, resulting in a 5% net loss. Conversely, if the S&P 500 rises, so does the strategy, but only up to the growth cap. Historically, caps have averaged 12.3%. Investing in one strategy with a single maturity risks either exceeding the protection limits or the growth cap for a prolonged period. The fund, however, invests in a laddered portfolio of 12 Buffer Protect strategies. Every month, the oldest strategy matures, and its performance is rolled into a new one-year strategy, with cap and protection levels reset to prevailing S&P 500 levels. As a result, at least part of the investment is likely to continue to participate in gains as the market rises and be protected as the market declines. Appropriate in low-risk equity or alternative sleeves of a portfolio, the fund aims to provide equity exposure with less volatility.
All right, you may have noticed some of the fine buzzwords they put in there. Of course, buffered, downside potential or downside limitations, upside potential, seeks to, tries to, things like that. So, but the essence they want you to grab without all these caveats is that they want you to think you're never going to lose more than 10% and you're going to make money and there's this big high cap, but you're going to make most of the stock market returns. So I went and I pulled up the prospectus for this mutual fund, 374 pages. Really? 374 pages. Well, guess what? I didn't fucking read it. I got shit to do in my life. I'm not reading a 374-page prospectus that no one else is ever going to read. You're not going to read it because I didn't read it. I mean, if you want to read it, give me a summary. Give me a book report. If you've got that much time to burn, 374 pages. So I looked for the summary prospectus, which is only 16 pages. And the nice thing about this fund, and this is one of those things that concerns me, they have all these different share classes. Now, Vanguard has individual, and they have Admiral, and they also have institutional, which is for really, really big investments, like $1 million plus in one fund. So it's not necessarily bad, but they've got A, C, investor, institutional, and Class Y. And of course, you'd have to read through all those differences. Class A, and if you have a mutual fund of any kind and it's got an A or any other letter just hanging out there randomly at the end, it's basically a load fund. That's the cheat. That's the quick and easy way for you to know if it's a load fund or not. If it has that letter hanging out there, it's got a load of some kind. If it doesn't have a letter out there, it still might be a load fund, but if it has a letter, it's really easy to spot. The A shares have a 5.75% front-end load. So, of course, you listen to the show, you would never buy that, right? You're going to go to the C shares, and the C shares have no front-end load. There is a back-end load if you sell it, within, 30 days. So you're going to hold it, so you're not going to pay that either. So I'll be fair, and I'm going to use the C shares. And in this summary report, they show the expenses for this fund, the total annual fund operating expense, and I'm quoting this from their document, is 3.53% per year. And I often talk about average stock funds having 1.5, 1.6% ratio, and index funds being 0.2, 0.1, 0.05, these really low numbers. And sometimes people say to me, Phil, how can a fund be 1.5%? That just seems obscenely high. Well, this is 3.53%. So if this fund were to make 10% a year, and it's not going to, but if it were, 35% of your money is gone to them. More likely it might make 6 or 7%. So they're getting half of all the returns, and you are not. So let's take a look at this, shall we? I pulled this fund up on Morningstar.com. And of course, any fund you want to look at, well, almost any fund you want to look at, you can go to Morningstar.com and get all kinds of information for free. It's a really lovely website. So I went and pulled it up. And in 2017, because keep in mind, this fund started in late 2016. So it's only been around 2.5 years now, which also, by the way, is a warning sign for me. I don't want to buy something that new because there's no track record. You can also get companies that make 10 or 12 or 15 different funds and then only sell the ones that survived a year or two without looking like complete pieces of crap. So they control the selection bias, not you. But this fund, again, so 2017 was its first full year, which is nice because according to Morningstar, the S&P 500 went up 21.83% during calendar year 2017. This fund went up 11.85. You missed 10 entire percentage points on the upside. So if this fund does protect you on the downside, and I don't know that it will, but if it does protect you on the downside, you've got to lose more than 10% just to make up for the first full year of what you lost. So you've got that going for you. The second year, 2018, the S&P 500 was minus 4.4%. This fund lost 2.2%. Now, in the video, in the audio clip that you heard, it claims that the first 10% loss you're going to be protected against. It didn't work out. It only went down 4. You still lost 2. Now, I'll grant you, you only lost 2, not 4. So that looks kind of cool for calendar year 2018. But they protected you on 2%. In the previous year, you lost 10%. So let's look at this year to date. And this is as of 5/31. Again, I'm looking at Morningstar, so they're pulling this data from 5/31. As of 5/31, year to date, S&P 500 was up 10.74%, and this fund was up 5.73%. Again, returning about half or minus 5 full percentage points behind. If I look at the data as of 6/13, when I record this segment, even though it might be in the show a week or two later, the year-to-date number for the S&P 500 is 16.4, and this fund has only made 9.2. So still, actually, it's even farther behind. They're now 7% behind year-to-date. So it doesn't protect you like it claims it was going to. And we don't have a really big drop since this was created 2.5 years ago. But when the market goes up, you're falling way behind. And this is a very, very expected result, that your underperformance on the upside is so big, you would have been better off to take a loss because this fund was short more than 10% in 17, overachieved by 2% in 18, and underperformed so far this year 7%. So you're down like 15, 16%. So if the market falls 15 or 16%, if you're just in the index fund, you're still ahead of this because you're paying all the expenses on this. So the expenses are waived. I should mention that. This is funny because it's one of those things that when I first pulled up the information, it said the expense ratio was only 1.95% because that's currently waived. So you're not paying a 3.53, and the little footnote says you will only pay 1.95%, and that cannot change until February of 2020. February 2020, 8 months from now. So in 8 months, it goes from 1.95 to 3.53, and there's nothing that prevents them from making it go higher than that. I don't know if that includes all of the expenses and buying and selling all the things that they do, because what they do is very, very complex and complicated, and I try to understand it myself, and I don't know that I do. What they do is they buy every month, they take 1/12 of the money, and they buy a handful of options. They do index call options, type A index call options, type B index call option, type A index put options, type B index put options, and index put options. And they have some footnotes. You can read all that if you want. If you're really dying to see this summary prospectus, send me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com, and I can send it to you. But I'm guessing, based on the 2.5 years of performance, that you would be pretty lucky to net out 5% per year on this thing. But it also does look like when the market goes up, it doesn't go up as much. When the market goes down, it does not go down as much. And so by definition of the mathematics, it is less volatile, significantly less volatile than the S&P 500 index on its own. However, if you put cash into your mattress, by definition, that's also much more volatile than the S&P 500 index on its own. So don't overdo escaping volatility. I mean, it's good to have a good, well thought out, planned investment philosophy and strategy and have investments in the right places at the right times. But something like this, where they're going to consume 3.5% of the money right off top, and they're probably going to underperform the upside, might do better on the downside, but nothing like what they said in the video, where the first 10% of losses you're not going to experience. It went down 4 and you lost 2. So even on the downside, it doesn't work. It's probably not going to work. And, this is just something I would not invest in. So the key takeaway here, if someone tries to sell you something that has a buffer or a buffered strategy, you've got to understand that that can be very, very expensive to you in the long run.
The Pope, discussing the existence of God with an out-and-out atheist, starts off very correctly discussion, and as the hours go by, it gets more and more heated, and eventually the Pope turns to the man and he said, "The mom! Get the mom! And you, come here. You are like a man who is totally blindfolded in a dark room looking for a black cat that is not there." The fellow said, "With all respect, Your Holiness, I think there's great similarity between us both." He said, "What do you mean, similarity?" He said, "Well, as far as I'm concerned, you are like a man who is blindfolded in a totally dark room looking for a black cat that isn't there. The only difference is that you found it."
This Investing Skeptically segment is called What the Fuck, Vanguard? Okay, I gotta chill out here a little bit. I just watched a webinar from Vanguard. I watch a lot of webinars and go to sessions because sometimes I learn things. I don't know it all. Things change. Things become new. Some things just won't die and they come back again and again. So I watch webinars from Vanguard and multiple of other companies. And sometimes I find something that I like. And sometimes I find things that annoy me. And this is one of those cases. John Bogle would be spinning in his grave if he could hear what they're talking about on this webinar that I watched. It was amazing. They were talking about, and I kind of get that they're stuck, because when you work for Vanguard and you are on this webinar, you kind of have to toe the company line. And one of the things that is a problem is that Vanguard not only has the best index funds in the world, in my opinion, they also have managed funds. I don't see a place for managed funds in my philosophy. It doesn't work. John Bogle convinced me. Of course, the fourth of 4 books in my reading series is Common Sense on Mutual Funds by John C. Bogle, the founder of Vanguard. Index funds are the way to go. But these people are saying you want a mix of index funds and managed funds. I disagree. I vigorously disagree. You don't want managed funds. They also went on to say most managed funds underperform the indexes, which I agree with. So why in the fuck are you recommending them? And then they insinuate that the managers of Vanguard managed funds have more skill than other managers of managed funds. All the data that I've ever seen, and maybe they've got something new that I'm not aware of, but I kind of doubt it. All of the data that I've seen is in the long run, managers beat index funds at a ratio that is equivalent to chance. There is not enough skill to compensate for the expenses involved with managing a fund, and that's before you even include tax complications. So I did not like that. Another thing that people had asked during this webinar was, how much bonds should I have? What percentage of bonds should I have? And they gave a couple of examples. One was if you're 40 years old, maybe 20% would be the amount of bonds that you would want to have. Regular listeners will know I disagree completely. Unless you are retiring in 10 to 12 years, I mean, if you're 40 and you're planning on retiring at 52 and you have the funds sufficient to do that, you're on target to do that, and it can happen that way if you've saved really, really well, maybe. But for most people, when you're 40, your fantasy is to retire at 55. Probably 60 is as good as you're going to get. You might have to wait to 62 to get Social Security because you need that extra income. And then you still might be compelled to wait a little longer to 65 because that's when Medicare kicks in. And if you don't have your insurance covered, your health insurance, it's a big problem for retirement. So having 20% of your portfolio in bonds at the age of 40 is a drag. I mean, not that it's a boring thing, but it creates a downward pressure on your overall growth, your long-term growth prospects. Of course, if the market takes a shitter right after I do this segment, I'll look wrong in the short term, but the long-term data says that's a bad idea. It's too much bonds. They went on to make an even worse suggestion, is that at retirement or close to retirement, you should have 70% of your money in bonds. I disagree. Depending on your situation, the right number could be 10%. The right number could be 50%. I can't fathom how it's going to be 70%. Now, if you have just a ginormous pile of money and you don't give a shit about how little you make and you just never want to think about how much money you're making, you never want to worry about it ever going down in the least bit, and you're okay with making just 3%, sure, you can have 100% in bonds. Everyone's different, but as a general guideline, telling people they should have 70% in bonds, I think is a disservice to investors. A lot of people, it's much lower. I generally give out 40% at retirement as a conservative, safe number for me to tell people in a general sense, because as the little blurb tells you, none of this is specific investment advice to any of you freaking listeners. These are just ideas that we're talking about. So 40% is a nice, safe number for me to give. For a lot of people, it can be lower. It depends on your cash flow needs. It's all about cash flow, because the reason for the bonds, in my head, in my model, is to cover your ass when the stock market goes in the toilet. That's what it's there for. You're not there because you're happy making 2 or 3%. You're in bonds because when the market goes down, you don't have to sell low. The whole idea is to create a system where you're continually buying low and selling high always. So that's one thing. They did suggest you should have all types of bonds. Again, I disagree. Regular listeners know for quite a while now I've been shying away from intermediate and downright avoiding long-term bonds because the yields are so low. They're barely any better than short-term bonds and may actually now be lower than short-term bonds, and the downside risk is significant. So I don't want to make 2 or 3% if I can lose a ton of money, because it defeats the purpose of the cushion in my program. So whatever. The other thing that they did was they were talking about how do they help clients? And one of the speakers suggested that if a client is really concerned about social issues, they'll recommend a generous portion of their money going into Vanguard's relatively new socially responsible fund. No. Absolutely not. I've done segments on this. Go back and listen to them. If you're new to the show and this is a big shock to you, socially responsible funds, the expenses are too high, the performance is too low, they can wiggle and do things that you thought they couldn't do anyway. Plus, on top of all of it, you're not doing anything to help the world in any way, shape, or form. It's a marketing gimmick. The very fact that Vanguard has one kind of makes me sad. It means that they've bowed to the pressure of what the marketplace wants instead of doing what is good for investors. And in summary, I'm wondering also, the people they put on these podcasts, they look like they've never, ever been in front of a camera or a microphone or a crowd. They're nervous. They can't seem to collect their thoughts. Just really bad form. That's enough. I was just going to do this for 2 minutes, and now it's 8. So that wraps up What the Fuck Vanguard. The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Your investments should be based on your situation, and you should consult with your financial advisor before taking any action. The show may contain ads. These ads are placed into the show by the hosting company after I finish recording and editing. I have little control over the content of the ads, and you should not assume that I support their products or claims. If you choose to support the show via the new Patreon page, that support does not create an advisor-client relationship.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
This Investing Skeptically segment is on yield inversion, and it's become a topic that a few people have asked me about or flagged me on Facebook, and I hadn't really planned on talking about it specifically, but when I get enough requests for information on something, it kind of changes it, so I guess I need to talk about it. In real brief, yield inversion is related to bond yields. Normally, let's say a really short-term bond makes 2%, a longer bond might make 3%, and a really long bond might make 4%. If the yield curve is flat, short, intermediate, and long-term bonds would all pay, I'm just going to pick a number out of the air, 3%. And the weird thing is that if you can make 3% lending someone money for a year, why would you lend them money for 20 years? Because you could just get another bond next year and keep rolling that over, having more access to your money, less volatility potential, and you're still making the same 3%. So why take on extra bond volatility when you're getting the same return? Yield inversion might be where you're getting 3% on short term, 2.5% on intermediate term, and 2.4% on long term. So now a long-term investment pays, on average, a lower yield than a short-term one. So that's what yield inversion is. Now, the question is, does it predict recessions? And someone just sent me a story from NPR. What just happened also occurred before the last 7 U.S. recessions. Well, I looked it up. It's true. Now, what do you do with that information? You don't do a fucking thing with it. That's what you do with it. Because of a couple different reasons, and I'm going to walk you through this. One, even if there was a correlation in the past, it does not mean there will be a correlation in the future. Correlation also does not equal causation. So the yield curve does not cause a recession. Maybe the pending recession causes the yield inversion. The other thing is that in the investing world, people often find patterns. And when enough people find and know about the pattern, they anticipate the pattern. And a lot of people know about the problem with yield curve inversions and its relationship to recessions. So maybe that's had negative downward pressure on the U.S. market for the last year or so, and it's already baked into the cake. You don't know. I went back a little farther. 1966 had a yield curve inversion, no recession. So it doesn't always work. The next one, 1970, had an inversion. 1970, and between 70, 71, and 72, the market went up 40%. So if you had used it as an indicator, you would have missed the 40% increase. Now, I will grant you that it went down the market. And every time I say the market in this segment, I'm talking about the S&P 500. You can go look it up, S&P 500 Wikipedia, and see some of these same numbers. The market did go down about 40% in 73 and 74, but then it went up 70% in 75 and 76. So this creates the problems that you were notified of an inversion, but it took almost 3 years before the market went down. So when do you use this information, even if it worked? 1980, there was another bond inversion, yield curve inversion, and the S&P 500 went up 32.5% that year. Now, 1981 was down 5%, but then there was an average increase of 15% for the next 9 years. So if you acted as soon as the inversion happened, you would have missed the 32.5% upside. Maybe you stayed out long enough to miss the 5% down, but then when do you get back in? And every year you wait, you lost another 15%. 1990, market inversion. Now, this time the market was down 3% that very year. However, 1991 was up 30.5%. So do you wait 1 year to get in? Do you do it, or to get out? Do you do it immediately? Because in this case, if you didn't do it immediately, you would have lost 3% and then said, oh, I have an inversion. I just lost some money. Take it all out. And then in 91, the market goes up 30.5%. You missed it. Not to mention, the market also went up the very next 9 years for an average return of 18% per year for the next 9 years. 2005 had a yield inversion. The market was up 2005, 2006, and most of 2007. And we had the big break in the system and all the real estate and everything in late 07. And of course, calendar year 2008, the market was down 37%. But if you'd sold out in 5, you would have missed 30% upside until you got to the 37% downside. And then, of course, when do you buy back in? Because 2009, market up is up 26.5%, and it's been up every year with a teeny weeny little, like 1 or 2% drop. Actually, last year was 4%, but it's returned 13% per year since 08. So again, if you see one of these inversions, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to sell now? Are you going to sell in a year? You're going to sell in 3 years. And if you sell now and the market goes up 30, 40% over the next couple of years, you miss all of that. Even if you sell now and the market goes down now, you got to know when to get back in. And that creates the market timing. And the fact that this is not temporally sensitive, meaning that you don't know if it's going to happen right away or up to 3 years later. You don't know when to get back in. And even if you get out at the right time and get back in at the right time, maybe the correction is only a few percentage points. And if that's the case, you could have created a whole lot of tax bills on the gains that you had before that you didn't need to have to do. And the other thing, of course, is the data, the history, the numbers behind all this says that on average, people cannot do this successfully. It just doesn't work. So don't panic. Carry a towel if you need to. But don't change your portfolio simply because there's a yield inversion. Of course, I'm not saying that means the market will go up in 2019. I don't have any idea. And that's one of the beauties of my system is that it doesn't really matter. You should have a smart portfolio where you can withstand a year or 2 or 3 of down market. But most of the time, you're getting all of those gains. So the 6 examples I gave above, if you had just held on, you would have done pretty darn good. You to really good. So don't freak out about it. It's not valuable information when it comes to your investments or to your portfolio. So that's just a little something on the current yield inversion. All right, now I'm here with Robert. Robert, how are you doing?
I can't complain. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. You're at the Ark Museum Park, whatever, protesting. Why are you doing that?
Well, there's 2 different reasons, really. One, I'm a former creationist. I found my way out of that through the lies that certain creationists were telling, mainly in fields of astronomy where they were deliberately misrepresenting things. And I decided I wanted to know what else they might not be representing accurately. And within a year of asking that question, I had read through the Bible and I was no longer a believer. The second reason that I'm out here is the tax breaks that the Ark is getting over the next 10 years, while at the same time the state of Kentucky is trying to tear retirement benefits away from its state employees. And I just think that's obscene that they would even treat their state employees who have worked for so long, including my sister, who's a teacher, and she stands to lose her retirement.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that you wrote a letter to somebody. Who'd you write a letter to? And walk us through that story.
I wrote a letter to Mr. not Dr. Kent Hovind, explaining where he'd gotten this particular claim in the field of astronomy wrong. And I was saying something you need to correct in your seminars. The Big Bang was not an explosion out of nothing. This law of conservation angular momentum does not say that everything should spin the right direction. Here's why. And so I wrote him that letter. And the letter I got back in response, I wish to this day that I had saved it. Because he wrote back saying, no. What you need to understand is da-da-da-da-da. And it was the same incorrect claim. And that's really kind of the catalyst that got me out of it.
And, of course, you just mentioned a minute ago, but you sat down and you read the Bible. Are you saying from page 1 to page whatever, you read it all the way through, and that didn't make you more of a Christian?
It did not. By the time I'd read where it was okay to keep slaves, I was kind of like, okay, no, this is wrong.
You never knew about the slavery part?
Never. The churches I was involved in, they were always quick to preach the homosexuality is a sin bits, but somewhere in there they left out the parts where it says it's okay to keep slaves and how long you can keep them.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
I'm Joshua Nicholas.
I'm Jessica Nicholas.
And I'm actually from the area, and I just come down here to protest mostly a lot because of different stuff that people don't see behind the scenes, like the 2% sales tax or 2% paycheck tax that everybody's got to pay just for living in the area.
Wait, are you telling me that if you live in the city, the county, what's the boundary? You got to pay 2% of what you make to Ken Ham?
Yes, any Grant County resident pays 2% of their check.
I don't like how they treat their animals and how they have worms and stuff like that.
Now, I'd heard a story. We don't need specific names, but did you know somebody that saw this in person?
Yes, I do. And they used to work in the Ark.
Yeah, one of our good friends that I've known for quite some time actually got a job just for her love of animals, and she wanted to use it to help get a job at the Cincinnati Zoo not too far. And she actually seen the treatment of the animals and basically quit right there on the spot.
And what do you guys want to happen to this thing? You want it to stay here? You just want it to not get taxes? You want it to shut down? What do you think?
I want it to shut down.
I think it should shut down. If not, at least pay their fair share in taxes, because this area is very bad in poverty. It's drug-ridden. They've had issues keeping the jail running and stuff. Like I said, if you drive through Williamstown, which is right up the road, there's more closed stores than there are open stores. The hotels don't stay busy. Nothing's happened that they've ever promised whatsoever.
So you're saying that this has not brought in economic activity, helped the economy out any?
No, I do not.
And I don't think so at all. I mean, I don't even think, in my personal opinion, got half the people that they claim that they get. I mean, it's bad just to see. I mean, there's no traffic ever in there. My sister comes and takes her kids to the little playground they have outside, because if you're a resident, you can come here and park for free. But there's still no one there. And the area in Grant County is one of the more poor areas in Kentucky. I mean, the fact that there's so many homeless people living in the streets, and that there's drugs like heroin epidemic is horrible in Grant County, and the money that they could receive from the Ark as far as funding stuff, they get nothing.
Great. Well, thank you both for your time.
I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
Hey, I'm Eric Murphy. I'm one of the hosts of Talk Heathen with the atheist community of Austin. I'm also a speaker, debater, and I'm out here supporting Kentucky free thought and the tri-state free thinkers in protesting the Ark Encounter. And I'm really, really excited to be here, because sometimes we argue over which way we want to go as a movement. Then this happens. And we realize that we do have common ground, that we do have work to do. And you know what? It's fucking time we do it. And it's refreshing to come and see people set their crap down for a common cause that is worth it.
Now, I don't know. Have you ever been in the Ark? I see the sign right over your shoulder, but have you ever been in it yet?
I'm not paying money for that shit. No, but I have seen the walkthroughs online. So
excellent. And tell me a little bit more about this podcast that you're on.
Ooh, so the YouTube channel that I'm on is Talk Heathen. I also have a podcast called The Atheist Podcast. And I have a channel coming out on YouTube that is yet to be announced. But if you want to find me, you can look up Talk Heathen, The Atheist Podcast. And I do have several of my debates online as well on Matt Dillhunty's channel, The Atheist Debates.
And do you have a Patreon page? Because maybe people could go and kick in some money to help you do this kind of stuff when they can't.
I'd actually really appreciate that, because I am moving into working on my own. And while I absolutely love the ACA and I'm always going to continue to work with the ACA, I'm happy doing this. And so if anybody likes what I'm doing, is supporting that, you can definitely go to patreon.com/theatheistpodcast and donate. Every little bit helps, and it enables me to go out and meet people and do these speeches and do these debates, because most organizations that want to do a debate can't afford to. And so most of the time it comes out of pocket. So it does help. It enables me to do that.
Great. Eric, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being here.
Dude, thank you, man. I'm like a huge fan of yours. Like, your show was one that I listened to long before I got into the movement. And of course, you know this, but your fans don't know this, that I fangirled like crazy when I first met you. And
It's true. It's true.
It is. It is. And the financial advice that you gave has gotten me through a lot of tight situations. And I just want to say thank you. I'm appreciative of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eric.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
Thank you for listening to The Phil Ferguson Show and for being here. I really appreciate it. And I forgot to say thank you to all the people at the Ark protest that came up and said hello. I greatly appreciate it. Very, very kind comments. You're all too nice, but I appreciate it very, very much. I do have a couple of reviews here. First on Stitcher from Degsy, I guess Degsy. Quote, "Hi, first heard Phil when he was a guest on The Atheist Experience. His investment advice is excellent, and even though it's U.S.-centered, it is still very useful and pertinent to those of us on the other side of the pond in England. Interesting guests and topics round off an excellent podcast. This is now one of my favorite podcasts to listen to on my commute, and it makes the commute a whole lot more enjoyable. Thanks, Phil." I appreciate that very much. Very, very, very kind words. And I do have one in iTunes. That one was on Stitcher. There's one in iTunes as well from jerk_FL. Quote, "Phil never has a boring show. Guaranteed you will learn new ways to improve your financial situation. Then sit back and enjoy an interesting interview or hear about cool stuff that Phil is doing. Win-win," end quote. Speaking of cool stuff, I am going to a conference in October. It's called CSI Con. It's put on by the Center for Inquiry. And if you've ever gone to TAM, the amazing meeting, or you regretted never being able to go to TAM, this is the next best thing. And it's actually getting maybe to the point where it's better. So CFI in Las Vegas, this is October 16 through 20, 2019. So it's just about 3 months from now. I've already got my registration and my hotel. It is in the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas. Again, October 16th through 20th. And my company and or my podcast is the official corporate sponsor for the event. We're still working on the details of what exactly that means, but I'm very, very excited to be involved with that conference. And of course, it's always good fun to visit Las Vegas. And if anyone is going, maybe early on we'll have a little meet and greet. I think right across the street is a little kind of open air mall thing where maybe we can all go and get a really strong drink and maybe some food. So if anyone's interested in that, let me know. Also, if you have show topic ideas, let me know. If you have questions about your investments, let me know. You can always contact me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. Send me an email. If I can, I'll answer it. If I don't answer your email and you thought it was reasonable and sane and I should have given you an answer, it might have gotten buried in all the emails that I get. I try very hard to answer everybody at least once. So feel free to email me again, remind me. If you are putting on a local or regional conference or even a national conference and you happen to listen to the show and you'd like to have your conference promoted on the podcast, let me know. If you have your own podcast, and I don't care how small it is, I am here to lift all boats. If you have a small podcast that you just started and you've got 4 or 5 episodes and you've only got 10 listeners and you want to see if you can get a couple more, let me know. We can do a quick interview and talk about your show. I'm always happy to help. I guess that's it for now. I hope to see you on the road somewhere. Until then, ciao.